I'm Richard Harris, and welcome to Real Risk, the podcast that talks to people who put themselves in harm's way. You know the type. Big wave surfers, professional soldiers, base jumpers. I'll get inside the heads of men and women who seem fearless or even reckless. They might seem crazy to us, but most are far from it. We'll be talking about putting your life on the line for something important. We're talking about real risk. Hi, and welcome to the podcast. Well, just over 3 weeks in, and I'm seeing a lot of downloads for the first 5 episodes, which I'm absolutely thrilled about. And today you're about to hear episode number 6. The list of extraordinary people I want to talk to is growing really fast, and I promise some amazing guests are coming up, even a couple of really big celebrities who will blow you away with their stories of risk and exploration. I really want to grow my audience, so I'm starting with a little giveaway. Every month I'm going to send out a personalised signed copy of our book, Against All Odds, the story of the Thai Cave Rescue, to someone who flicks me an email comment. And don't forget, the email's in the show notes, admin@speleopix.com.au. And guess what? It doesn't even have to be a favourable review. I'll just choose one randomly. I really want your feedback on how I can make this better. And also, let me know if you can think of a guest you'd like to hear interviewed. Anyway, on to today's guest. As a doctor myself, I'd heard of this guy for a long time, as he's a bit of a legend. And there's a strong reason why I was interested in hearing his story. When I was in Thailand as part of the Thai Cave Rescue, there was a Special Forces operator and 3 other Thai Navy SEALs camped in Chamber 9 with the stranded soccer team. This guy's name was Dr. Puck. You heard this right, the guy was a doctor. Turns out he's not only an army doc, but he'd completed Special Forces training with all 3 branches of the Thai military. Now, I'm not saying there's anything special about being a doctor, but surely that makes this fellow a bit of an overachiever. And thinking about Pac made me think of our own Aussie version of this superhero. A member of Australia's Special Air Service Regiment, Dr. Dan Pronk is now the Medical Director of TACMed Australia. It's my great pleasure to chat to him. Dan, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks very much, Harry. It's a privilege to be here, mate.
I'm really excited to have you here. I've got so many questions for you, and it really sounds like your life has been a bit of a boy's own adventure in some ways. But we better go back and start at the beginning. Now, tell me, you came from a military family?
Yeah, that's correct. So my dad was an Army helicopter pilot. And so, he evolved into an Army helicopter pilot. He'd spent some time as a soldier with the Army before he commissioned and became an officer, and he spent some time driving tanks with the Army before I was born. And then in my youth, he'd commissioned in the Army, become an officer, done his pilot training, and was a helicopter pilot, reaching the ranks of a commanding officer, so Lieutenant Colonel, commanding officer of an aviation regiment, which was how we first sort of knew Dad as kids, my brother and I.
So the Army was a familiar thing to you?
Yeah, look, it was. We grew up in that environment and going to the Army Open days and doing all that sort of good stuff back before OH&S kind of shut it all down. So it was really good fun as kids to be exposed to that environment, and it was very familiar to my brother and I.
Actually, I can well imagine, because my father was a surgeon. So again, I grew up being familiar with hospitals. I used to go on ward rounds with him on a Sunday morning, and he was a vascular surgeon. So,
right.
I can remember as a kid, he'd whip back the sheets and show me these gruesome stumps and, decaying legs. And what do you think of that one? I'll go, oh, God. And, the old diggers would have a bit of a laugh, and he'd have a laugh. So it's funny how you get drawn to things that are comfortable and familiar. And I guess that happens with a lot of people, doesn't it? They end up doing something like what their parents do because it's all familiar.
Yeah, I guess so. I tried not to gravitate towards the Army, but found my way back there.
Yeah, I didn't think I'd be a doctor, actually. I was going to be a marine biologist or a vet was my plan, but things don't always work out the way you think. And what about medicine? What drew you to medicine?
That was more on a whim, if I'm being perfectly honest. I'd finished my schooling, and I'd gotten out of school. At that time, I was a keen athlete and was pursuing triathlon, and I'd moved to the Gold Coast and was training full-time and trying to make a go of professional triathlon. And I'd done some part-time uni over about 4 years. I did an exercise science degree, and I really enjoyed that. And as a result of that, studied hard and did relatively well in that. And then at the end of that, spent another year training and racing towards triathlon. Became pretty clear I wasn't going to be the triathlete I wanted to be, and I didn't have a future professionally in that sport. And so I was starting to look at where to. I had to grow up and get a real job. I was 23 odd years old at that point, and the exercise science degree was interesting, but not. The jobs were limited, and I didn't really want to work in that field, but it was a good launch pad for something else, and that something else was either physio or potentially medicine. And so I sat the postgraduate medical school entrance exam, got through. Around that same time, I'd been looking at the Army for the first time seriously. I'd never thought about joining the Army prior to then, but it became clear that I needed to start a career, basically. It was at that time, and so the two came together, and I ended up getting into medical school, getting into the Army on a scholarship to study medicine.
And was part of that joining the Army as a way to fund your studies and just to support you? Absolutely.
That was the draw card. I saw the free money, and it's with hindsight, it was the money and the opportunity. There was no other realistic way that I could see that I could fund med school. I guess people do it, of course, but at that point I saw the opportunity to join the Army, get funded through medical school, get paid while I did it. It looked great, and so I signed up. And
did you go to Flinders University?
Yes.
Yeah. So same alumnus as myself. So I remember being back at uni and looking at the Navy program. I was interested in being a seafaring man, and wondered whether that might be an opportunity to be able to move out of home and be self-sufficient. And I can't really remember why I didn't proceed with it. But what strikes me as interesting about your case is, of all the people I know who did something like that, I don't think any of them would have imagined, and perhaps yourself would have imagined, where that was going to take you in terms of ending up in Australia's most elite combat unit.
Yeah, I could not have seen that coming, and it was something that was never on my radar until the end of my first year of medical school, to be honest. It just never occurred to me, and my brother had gone through, he was always going to go into the Army. So as a teenager, he was right into school cadets. He did really well at school, got a scholarship to the Defence Force Academy. And so that was his direction from the earliest age, to move into the military. And so I'd watched that happen, and I was following a very different path to my brother at the time. But he ended up going through ADFA, and then Duntroon, became an infantry officer, spent some time with an infantry unit, and then did SAS selection and went across to the Special Air Service. And it was at the end of my first year of medical school that, so that was 2001, and towards the end of that year, of course, the September 11 attacks happened, and Australia had a commitment in Afghanistan. By the end of that year, they'd sent a special operations element. My brother was getting ready to go with the second push to Afghanistan, and it was at the end of that year I went to visit him in Perth. I met some of his mates from the SAS and saw what they did, went and toured the base and had a bit of a look, and it was this light bulb moment for me. I thought I've got to be a part of that.
What's your recollection of meeting those guys? Did they have an aura about them? Were they something special, or did they just seem like genuine, nice, ordinary blokes?
They had the aura, and I don't know, I think prior to that I had no real awareness or interest in special operations. So I guess I came in with no preconceived ideas of who they'd be or what it was all about. It hadn't flagged on my radar at all up until that point. And I remember the first time I met a bunch of them, my brother had picked me up for that visit when I went to see him before they deployed, and went directly to a barbecue at one of his mates' house. And so there was about a dozen blokes there, and just this impression of, they were very accepting. Of course, I was a brother of one of their own, I wasn't a complete stranger, but they're very accepting, very just approachable, nice, no nonsense, but purposeful people. And you could tell straight away, obviously very physically fit, but very intelligent, just had this air of confidence without arrogance, was my initial impression of them. And it was at that very barbecue that I was talking to a bloke by the name of Keith Fennell, who's subsequently written a couple of books. He was in my brother's troop at the time, and he was the one that put the thought into my head. So in conversation, he said, "Hey, you know what? You should do selection, come across to SASR." I said, "No, look, I'm on this trajectory to become a doctor. I'm going to be a doc with the Army." He's like, "Yeah, we'll do selection, come across and be a doc at the unit." And that was the light bulb moment. I'm like, "Yep, that's what I'm going to do."
So I'm really interested to talk further, and we'll do this in a minute, about whether you then in that role were more as a doctor, or were you a soldier, or was there some bizarre hybrid? Because has anyone else done something like this, Dan?
Yeah, absolutely. So there was a precedent of doctors that had gone through special operations both at the Special Air Service and the 4RAR, which subsequently became the 2nd Commando Regiment. So there was a half a dozen or so docs that had gone before me and done exactly that, either become really engaged with the unit without going through the selection process, but did operational roles, particularly in Afghanistan. There was a precedent there of the docs going outside the wire, to use the terminology, so projecting forward with the SAS elements or the 2nd Commando elements and being there at point of injury to be able to do their response. And there was also a precedent of doctors and medics having done the selection course as well. So, yeah, the people had trod that path before me, absolutely.
So burning question number one that I've wanted to know for so long is, why would the Army send someone who is such an expensive asset as a doctor? You've had all this training, all this investment in you. You know, at the front line, can a doctor do more than a well-trained medic? Because I know that working with my paramedic colleagues in the aeromedical service, you know, at the point of injury, in my case, say a car accident, you know, our skills are brought to the same level. You know, the ABCs can be done equally efficiently, and there's some stuff that a physician maybe can finesse that a paramedic can't, but by and large, it's quite hard to show a difference in outcomes, obviously, in that situation. I've always been puzzled that you would be allowed to go outside the wire.
Yeah, look, I think early in my career I had this grandiose misconception that I might have something more to offer than a medic. And as my career progressed, I became acutely aware that was wrong, that a well-trained combat medic could do the job as well as, if not better, than I could as a doctor. There was as you'd be well aware in the pre-hospital world and that immediate response, it's fairly blunt instrument medicine. It's the immediate hemorrhage control. It's the recognition and decompression of the tension pneumothorax. It's pretty simple stuff. And when people get hit in that setting, they're either going to die of their wounds, and there's not much you can do about it. They either get killed instantly or they're on a trajectory to death. And no matter what you do, you're not going to save them, or they're not going to die. They've been hit and they're not going to die, no matter how long they're left to be in the field before extraction. And then there's that very narrow window in between of injuries where you can intervene in a timely fashion and make a life-saving difference. And most of that, overwhelmingly on the battlefield, is controlling massive hemorrhage. And so that's not particularly, you don't need 4 years of medical school and an internship and whatever else to do that. You need a solid training in applying arterial tourniquets, in other hemorrhage control techniques. The complexity of the medicine in the tactical environment is the context. It's the tactical context. It's not the medical procedures. So looping back to your question, no, you're quite right. I didn't offer anything as a doctor. Really, I can't think of a time where I made a difference that a medic wouldn't have. Oh, maybe once, but that's in sort of 2 cumulative years operating in Afghanistan. So it was rare.
Yeah, I think it's quite recipe driven, that kind of medicine, isn't it? It's having the recipe in your head and the experience to trot it out at the right time and not get distracted by, well, in my case, the rain and the ambulances and the firemen are running around with their saws. In your case, much more threatening things happening around you, I guess. Well, that's interesting to say. So did you kind of keep that concept to yourself a bit for fear that they might take you back to the base hospital or something and replace you with a medic?
To a degree. And as I said before, I think I honestly believed that I was the best asset to have out on the ground in my first couple of tours of Afghanistan with special operations. And then it was as I went along and saw the capability of the medics and realised that they can do everything I can do in the pre-hospital setting. And there was a couple of key missions where I wasn't out on the job, or we had 2 missions going on and I was on one job and someone got hit on the other job, and the medics did these fantastic jobs. And that was what made me realise that, hey, you know what, I'm not as good as I'd like to think I am at this, or I'm no better than the medics, and indeed I need to empower them and have a lot more, not faith, I had full faith in them, but just that realisation that in that pre-hospital trauma context, they were as good an asset as I was.
So my limited understanding of the way these small units operate in the field is you'll have a specialist in various areas and someone in command, obviously, but small groups, 4 or 5, sometimes working in isolation. Would you be working in that context as the medic in that small patrol?
No, generally not. So if you had an element as small as a 4 or 5 man team going out to do and they would not be, you wouldn't send 4 or 5 blokes out to do an offensive mission, a kill capture mission. That would be a larger element, but maybe a reconnaissance type mission or in an observation post, these kind of things. The way that the task group would use their one doctor, so there was one doc attached to our task group, would be if it was justifiable, if you were on a larger mission, or if it was deemed relatively high risk, or it was at the extremes of the aeromedical evacuation timeframes, these kind of things. So it was a risk mitigation scaled to the appropriateness of the mission. So for the smaller jobs, each operator with either 2 Commando or the SAS regiment would get their full gamut of training in all their tactical bits and pieces, and then a percentage of them would then get a medical training in there as well. So either a thing called a combat first aider or a patrol advanced first aider. And so that upskilled them in some fairly useful, mostly hemorrhage control type stuff, but up to and including things like surgical airways, these kind of things. So if they were going out in smaller groups, they'd have their patrol first aiders or their combat first aiders. Slightly larger groups, they had medics, so patrol medics who were Army Medical Corps as opposed to infantry, which is the SAS or the 2nd Commando. And so these medics would be attached to those elements and get a tactical training. And so you'd have a medic per platoon or troop of SAS or commando operators, and then sitting above that in terms of the medical construct was your medical officer. There was also, depending on what was going on, so on the tours where there was a lot of fighting, a lot of activity, and we were taking casualties, and particularly if we had fatalities, then the task group would seem to want to project medical forward, and that's where the doc would get really engaged, and there'd be a keen interest, obviously, to try and minimise all of that and have the best. And so I think even though you and I know that a doctor doesn't offer a whole bunch more in that setting, I think when you look at it from the outside perspective and from a risk mitigation perspective, from the point of view of getting your mission approved, because every mission needs to be signed off by various levels of hierarchy. You can't just go rogue and go and hit targets. You need to get it all signed off. And so I think as you went up the chain of command there, people were far more reassured if there was a doctor, and it just looked better on paper.
Well, I was going to ask also, is it good for morale for the other guys knowing that you're there?
Absolutely. And I think that was another big thing that I realised over the years, and particularly when we had guys killed in the field. If I was there and I responded, it meant that it wasn't a medic or a patrol first aider having to respond to their mate. It kind of took that responsibility off them, and it allowed everyone to, after all was said and done, to say, well, you know what, we had the doc there, he had to go, he couldn't save the bloke couldn't be saved. And you know, that was, I think, from a psychological perspective and a mental health perspective, that was really reassuring. But also, even if we didn't have blokes hit, I think there was a certain level of assurance knowing that you had a doc kicking around somewhere, so that if you took a hit, you'd have a decent chance of a good medical response.
Did the boys treat you or defer to you in any different way to the other combatants? Were you just one of the boys, or was there something slightly different? No,
it was different. So we sat in a construct called medical troop. So we were the medical specialists, and so that was myself as the doc, and then the various levels and different ranks of medics and what have you under that. And so we had our own identity within the unit and our own sort of, well, that niche skill set that we brought to the party. So we weren't operators. We weren't there with a primary function to, you know, we were never first through the door. That's just dumb. And there's blokes that train their whole career to be that guy, and they're exceptional at it. We were there to be close enough, the casualty, to be able to respond, but never be the bloke right at the pointy end. And it as it would play out, you'd end up in situations where you needed to engage in combat, and that was just how it is. So we needed to have enough of a tactical skill set and training to behave appropriately in a gunfight, and to be another weapon basically when you needed to control a situation, because there was you couldn't provide any form of medical response unless you could provide you control the tactical situation. And so medics, whatever level of medical personnel on the ground needed to be able to participate in that to control the tactical situation. But then once it was controlled enough to start doing your primary medical interventions, if you had a casualty, that's when you'd back out of the gunfight and the other guys would keep.
I mean, we all learn the algorithm of resuscitation, whether it's ABC or Dr. ABC or C March or CABC. I guess in your case, it's, return fire, be safe, and then ABC.
Yeah, there's a great quote actually. It comes from a Navy SEAL medical bloke, and it was the best medicine in the battlefield is superior firepower, and it's sort of a wanky, gung ho type quote, but it's very true. Unless you can control that tactical situation, you are not only not going to be able to provide a good initial medical response, but you're likely to become a casualty yourself, and then you're another liability.
What were you like as a kid, Dan? Were you a troublemaker? I've got this picture of operators and SAS type people being, handy with their fists at school and always in trouble, no respect for authorities, independent thinkers. Does that describe you, or were you something different?
Look, I think it is fascinating to me to see that, and it's like any of these fringe dwelling occupations, if you like, these slightly left of centre, and I guess the SAS is one where there's also a shroud of operational security around it, so the information doesn't get out and people see a limited snapshot of it. But like some of the other guests you've had on the show with the base jumping community and the deep cave diving community, these sort of groups, I think it's not normal people that get drawn towards these occupations. It's fascinating to have been a part of those organisations and seeing the personalities that make up those organisations. And there's some key common traits, and indeed the selection process is very designed to filter out a certain type of person, and that's a person who's likely to function well in highly complex and often sort of rapidly deteriorating situations and not just curl up in a ball. But in amongst those groups, even once you've distilled everyone down and selected your guys and girls for your unit, there's a lot of individual variability. But yeah, you're right. There's a lot of people that have had probably ADHD type tendencies as kids. I think there's a lot of people that gravitate towards the action sports, the base jumping, skydiving, all that sort of business. A lot of people were right into their mixed martial arts and the combat sports. And I guess if you track that back, the personality type that is interested in moving towards special operations is one that's not averse to violence, and oftentimes I suspect there's some fairly antisocial personality traits in there without being blown out into the full, they're probably on the spectrum of psychopathy to not use too harsh a term, but
let's not mention any names in case they find out where
No, you're exactly right. But I guess there's a lot of resilience and there's a lot of protective psychological traits that are on that same spectrum. And as long as you don't kind of cross a line and end up, or you come from a socioeconomic background that can support that and promote that and harness those energies. And actually, there's a bloke, Dave Grossman's written some pretty interesting books on this, one called On Killing, where he looks at exactly that, the psychology of people who gravitate into those sort of roles. But coming back to myself as a kid, I did martial arts as a kid, but it was a passing interest. I had no real great interest in combat sports. Got in the occasional fight as every kid did at school, but I wasn't one of those types that gravitated towards violence. It wasn't part of our family culture or dynamic or anything like that. We moved around a lot as kids, and so I was in a new school every 2 years. So relatively introverted, I guess, kept to myself. I'd make superficial friends at any given school I was at, but I knew I'd be gone in a couple of years. So it certainly wasn't a bad childhood. It was actually very good. It was just maybe different to your normal childhood. But in my teenage years, I started to rebel a little bit and probably move towards what you're describing. I wasn't a bad kid. Wasn't particularly academic. Just
did enough.
Yeah, did enough to get through school. Had a few troubles at school, but I think it was more me just trying to find my identity. And I think it was also at that age, my brother was a couple of years older than me. He was very academic and pushing towards the military. And I think I was probably on some level trying to be the opposite of that, just to create my own identity. And with that came a bit of risk-taking behaviour.
But I mean, you obviously had the academic ability to get through medical school, so it was there, but it was just not something you were passionate about at school, or?
I look back, I've still got some of my report cards, and they're the textbook. Dan is highly intelligent but doesn't apply himself, or Dan's very clever, I can see the potential but is disruptive in class, and all that sort of business. And I look back and I cringe, and I think of some of the interactions with my parents and my teachers and the missed opportunities to really learn something, because I was just a bit of a shit of a kid, but that's...
Jeez, I feel like I'm looking in the mirror right now, hearing all that stuff. But without the athletic ability, unfortunately, so that would have put the SAS out for me. Getting back to your work during your deployments, did you see yourself as a doctor first or a combatant first?
Doctor, yeah, for sure. So I mean, the position I held with that Special Operations Task Group was the medical officer. So the regimental medical officer, that was the spot I always deployed in. And the other side of it, so that drive to go through the selection process and try and integrate into that, really get a foot in the door with the operational side, was just for me, well, there's a couple of things. It was a personal desire to accomplish that, to see if I could, because it was a great challenge. And so it after I'd basically failed to achieve what I wanted to in triathlon, I had a bit of a void there of wanting to try and be the best version of myself I could be. And I guess the SAS selection process was a great focus for that. And then academically, I had medical school, which was a great challenge. And so the two, training towards selection and doing medicine, was for me just a really invigorating period where I felt I was moving forward. I felt like I was evolving as a person physically and mentally, and with this lofty goal in the future that I may or may not achieve, but it was just good to drive me through that period. But it was always about being a doctor. So that was my identity with the unit, and that was the role that I filled. I never thought of myself as being an operator, and that's not what I was there to do. I was there to have enough of a tactical skill set to be able to be there to try and help a bloke at the point of injury. And that meant I had to build that skill set and build some of that trust and rapport with the operators. But at the same time, I needed to make sure that my medical skill set was being optimised as well, so that when the blokes got hit, I could do my best to save them.
Do you remember the day when you're out in the field and got involved in your first engagement?
Yeah. I think everyone who's been in a situation like that remembers it pretty vividly, and that happened actually towards the end of my first deployment, which was 2009, and our first deployment with the Special Operations Task Group. I'd done a trip to Timor before that with a regular Army group, but I guess it's I look back and I cringe on this as well. It's one of those things where I suppose anyone who gets into that environment wants to know how you're going to go in combat. And I guess the parallels might be someone who trains very hard to play a sport or what have you, and then never gets the chance to play the game. And there's parallels there with the military side of things. And I think naively at that point, I wanted to be a part of all of that. I wanted to know what combat was all about. And I guess I wanted to also know how I would react to that, because you never really know. Everyone likes to think that they'd be okay in that situation, they'd respond appropriately, but until you're there, you don't know for sure. And so the first time I got very accurately shot at was towards the end of my first trip to Afghanistan. And we'd gone down into southern Afghanistan. A British element had a helicopter shot down, and they'd lost some key bits of kit. They had to bug out of there pretty quickly, and so they got all their blokes out. But they'd left behind, from memory, a small UAV, an unmanned aerial vehicle, and a couple of tough book computers, and they wanted them back, amongst other things. And so our task group got sent in to recover them from the village that they'd been tracked back to, and so we went in and it was at that point the biggest gunfight I'd ever been in. The village just erupted. We'd inserted overnight. We'd sort of landed 15 k's out in the desert and stomped in throughout the night, and then hit the target at first light, and it was on. And so that was the first experience of real combat, proper combat that I'd been in. And in amongst all of that, I was in a compound and I was moving from one side of the compound to the other to try and get a better view of something at the time. And a bullet just cracked straight over my head and thumped into the wall, and it would have missed me by, maybe a foot, if that. And so it was very, very close.
That was personal.
Yeah, it was for me. It was for me. It wasn't a random shot. I hit the deck and I found myself giggling like a schoolgirl. I thought it was, and I have a tendency to laugh inappropriately, I guess, if I'm nervous or something along those lines. But it was not. There was no fear. It was excitement, and it was just, yep, this is what it's all about, and that's what
game on.
Yeah, that's right. And I think it was a bit of just, oh, geez, that was close type thing. But yeah.
And what about firing back? Did that feel comfortable? Yeah, do you know what I mean? I mean, you're a doctor.
Yeah.
You're there to do good. We're trained to save lives, and for the first time, you've actually got to point your gun at another person and pull the trigger. I'm just really curious how, the morality of that as a doctor. How did that feel?
There was I don't think it was morality as a doctor per se. It was morality as a human being, and there's a real, in most people, I think, a reluctance to the thought of taking another human life. Obviously, it's very taboo topic, and it's from a psychological perspective, it's a big deal, And I in that same gunfight, I found myself in the situation where I had a sight picture of a bloke that we thought was an enemy combatant, and he was behind a wall, and I couldn't see his hand. So I couldn't see if he was armed or if he had a radio, if he was communicating for the Taliban. And that was on that very same day, the first time where I had this sight picture of this bloke, and I was getting information that someone had seen him with a weapon and a radio, but I couldn't see myself. And so I was lying there watching this guy. He didn't know I was there. He was looking through the compound I was in down into the village where the main gunfight was going on. And I was lying there waiting to see if he see the weapon or see the radio, and that would have been the confirmation that he was a legitimate target. And what ended up happening was we had another element behind that compound, and they had a better view of him, and they could see that he was armed, and one of those guys actually engaged him. And so I watched that engagement through my sight, but it wasn't me that pulled the trigger. But it was the first time that I had that potential to take a human life, and it was quite a confronting sort of a situation. It was, and as it turned out, I didn't pull the trigger, but I was certainly willing to. But the magnitude of the situation hit me. It hit me. I thought, hey, oh, hang on a sec, this is maybe on me.
Yeah, that's a really interesting thing to talk about. I don't know, and I can't. I don't think anyone who hasn't been in combat can even imagine some of the stuff that goes on and what you have to think about. But for me, whether I would be more frightened of being shot at or that moment of decision where you think you might have to shoot someone else. So these are the big questions. And it's fascinating to me what you said earlier, that question about how will I react will I be the guy curled up in the trench sucking my thumb? And we've all probably got that deep-seated fear that might be me. Or will I be okay? I don't know whether this is a boy thing or a human thing, but we all want to be tested. And the idea of being in combat at some strange level, however horrific, I know I can't imagine, but it must be. I think we all want to know the answer to that question in some way, or I feel like I do. I can't speak for everyone. Perhaps people think I'm mad to even think that, but I can kind of sympathise with you in those moments to wonder, will I be the man I want to be, or will I?
Yeah, it's and I guess we're probably similar personality types in a lot of ways, and I think the types that are drawn towards things like what you do with your cave diving, and I've reflected on, and I like the rest of the world, watched with keen interest when you blokes were trying to work out how to pull those kids out of the cave in Thailand, and that in many ways is a good parallel, I think, to a forum where you can test your abilities, and it comes back to that. You're training for this. You've got a skill set, and it's the ultimate arena to test your skill set, where the consequences are life and death, and not only for the patient but for yourself potentially. And so I guess that is, for the right person, it's really appealing, and I found that to be the case in the pre-hospital combat environment. It was that ultimate arena where you're playing for keeps. It's a highly complex environment, and if you get it wrong, your casualty's dead, or maybe you're dead, and that was very exciting to me, which might sound a bit sort of weird to some listeners, but yeah, for me that was the ultimate.
I think
test.
A lot of people will get it, but it's something we're not really encouraged to say out loud. Perhaps.
No, it's a bit taboo, isn't it? Yeah.
There's a lot of parallels between what we're talking about and perhaps for the police and fireys. You know, they do all this training, and they don't want to see a house on fire with people being victims inside. They don't want to die in a fire themselves, but there's no way they don't want to put that training into practice. And, you know, with the cave rescue, for example, we'd done all this training around bringing someone out through a flooded section of cave, but I never really thought I'd get to put it into practice. And I've got to tell you, I was as keen as mustard when the phone call came to get over there and put that into practice. I don't know how keen I'd be to go into battle, but I have a sense of what you're talking about, and I've read certainly that a lot of highly trained soldiers just can't wait to give it a go.
Yeah, and it becomes, and I mean, coming back to your point, you were trained to do that, and so you had that can't wait to get there. I was trained to do the other, and I couldn't wait to get there, but I look at what you did and I'd be thinking, ooh, shit, that's not for me, you know, and vice versa. It's what you're trained in, and that gives you that resilience and that confidence to approach one of those situations and to try and test these skills that you've been learning in practice in the safe training environment, practice them real time. So, yeah.
You're listening to Real Risk, the adventure podcast with Richard Harris. I imagine the immersive training that the SAS and those sort of forces would get would mean that when the first bullet slapped into the brick wall next to you, that wouldn't come as a complete shock. Something nearly like that must have happened in training, I guess.
Oh, to be honest with you, the vast majority of the situations I found myself in, casualty situations, combat situations, seemed remarkably simple. They seemed remarkably simple, and there was so much training that had gone into us, and I didn't appreciate this at the time, but I look back now, and I'm so eternally grateful to all the people who invested in me before I found myself in those situations, because we all these selfless people that would share their skills, would train us endlessly in both tactical type stuff, but more so in tactical medical response. There's a whole bunch of brilliant people, cardiovascular surgeons, anaesthetists. There's a really robust trauma training that goes into any of the medical elements that project forward, and that training is the highest fidelity that we have available to us, and really well run to the point where you get trained and trained and trained and built up and built up and built up, and then trained to failure, and then debriefed and trained again past that previous point of failure. And it's to the point where when you look at that skill acquisition type construct, you go from your unconscious incompetence, conscious incompetence, unconscious competence. But you are everything's programmed in muscle memory. It's there for you without thinking of it in conscious thought. And so you program to that level of unconscious competence in your primary skill sets, which allows everything to just flow. It's there for you. And I found myself in a number of occasions doing things and not thinking about your higher order thought is free to think about the tactical environment. I found my hands putting on tourniquets or packing wounds or doing a primary survey or doing this or the other on a casualty, but your mind's thinking, right, I walked past a landing zone that'd be perfect for the AME, helo, 2 compounds down, and we've got this bloke here, and I know my medic's there, and I know this guy's got O negative blood if I need some of that, and there's another casualty there, is he okay? And so it was this incredible, with hindsight, the ability to function at that level in those environments was just a testament to the training that we had. And so there was a lot that went into it that I didn't appreciate at the time, but I now do. And that was what allowed all of us to function in those environments.
Sounds like a lot like the consultant on the floor of the ED on a busy shift. They've just got that oversight, that situational awareness of everything that's going on around them without really consciously thinking of it. And I think a lot of military type doctors are drawn to the casualty environment, the ED.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a natural parallel to the military world. It's a bit more high speed and a bit more complex. And like you say, there's a lot going on. And I think the personality type that's drawn to military medicine is also often drawn to those somewhat chaotic environments and trying to make some order out of that chaos.
The tightness of the bond between the guys you work with is particularly strong, I imagine, in Special Forces. You have to go through that excruciating selection test and beyond together, so you become very close to those guys. Do you remember the first time one of those friends became catastrophically injured or worse?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is another, I think, for anyone that's been in any of these environments, and I guess in your world it'd be the loss of someone cave diving in that fraternity that's obviously very high risk as well. But those are the memories that get etched into your mind, and they're the real pivotal turning points in any of your careers, I think. And I guess they are also thinking about this chat on this topic of risk, and to be honest, it was something I hadn't really given a bunch of thought to, the risk aspect of the job, but just reflecting before coming to record this, and there was a few points in my career where the risk of what we were doing really came home, or really came to the forefront of my mind. And there was a period of time in 2011 I was deployed where within a space of 2 months we lost 3 blokes, and I'd responded to all 3 of those blokes. But the first one of them was a mate of mine who'd hit an improvised explosive device, and we'd once again in southern Afghanistan, we'd inserted and we'd kicked a bit of a hornet's nest, and the job we were going in for was 48 hours, and it was on from the second we hit the ground in the middle of the night. The helicopters touched down. In this instance, we landed right next to the village to try and get the surprise, and the second we got off those helos, we were engaged, and it was pretty much non-stop fighting for the full 36 hours leading up to when a small team of our guys hit a IED, and I moved forward with a quick reaction force to respond to that. And there was one guy who was very, very badly damaged, and the other 3 had sustained injuries to various degrees. But that's and sadly we did everything we could and couldn't save the worst hit bloke, and that was a really critical turning point for me in my career, but also in my life. With hindsight, it was a real eye-opener. And then over the next couple of months, we lost another 2 blokes. One was killed instantly, and so I didn't have any medical response to him, but the other one I responded to and tried to resuscitate, and we lost him as well. And after that, after coming home from that tour, I was pretty shaken, I think probably understandably, but I think what had happened there was it just, what had been on my first trip, we didn't lose anyone from our task group on that first trip. Lots of near misses, couple of guys shot, but no one killed. I guess I had a false sense of security, this invulnerability, this bulletproof, we can't be killed. And then on that second trip to lose those blokes, they were senior blokes, they were hardened operators, brilliant soldiers. It wasn't like they were doing something wrong or they'd made a mistake or they were bad soldiers. It was just stood on one spot where there was an IED rather than 30 centimetres to the right where there wasn't, or a bullet that would have flown past to the right if there was a gust of wind goes straight through their head. And so it was this awareness that we were playing for keeps, and that if those blokes can get killed, then hey, there's absolutely nothing stopping me getting killed either. So
what I've found with all risk takers, including the cave diving fraternity that I know well, is no one would start doing a base jump, a dive, a climb, or going into battle thinking that they're going to die, because you couldn't get out of bed in the morning to do that. So I assume that for the most part, guys like yourself are trained so well, and the Army psychology says you are so well prepared that death is a very unlikely outcome, or is it more that you guys are just, so cool that you can walk out of the wire in the morning and go, yeah, this might be my day, but I'm going to do my job?
I think there was a resignation. Everyone understood that you might not come home from your tour. But so on some level, and before every trip I went on, I'd write a letter to my wife and my kids, and that was pretty confronting. The first time I wrote one of those, we'd call them death letters, and sealed it in the orange envelope. I think I've still got them somewhere, but I wrote on the front, "Dead Dan," and I put it in. And so I but writing those letters was, I guess it brings it into the forefront of your mind, thinking, what shit, this is not just about me. This is leaving kids behind. This is leaving a wife behind. And then as we went along and I started to see those kids and wives and brothers and sisters and parents left behind with the guys that got killed, that the magnitude of it continued to grow for me, the awareness of the risk. But there was that resignation, but by the same token, the risk was remarkably low. And I think what people don't consider when we're thinking about risk is there's two axes to a risk matrix. There's the worst case scenario. So what's the worst thing that could go wrong in a special operations environment? And it's catastrophic. It's multiple people killed. And we saw that, a number of times. Actually, 10 days ago to this day, the Special Operations Task Group had a helicopter crash and had 3 blokes killed. And so, that's catastrophic, and that's the worst case scenario. But the other axis is how likely is that going to happen? And that's where you get your risk. And so the reality was that the likelihood of being killed on operations in Afghanistan was remarkably low, really. It's that the absolute outcome was catastrophic, likelihood pretty low. And when you look at our entire commitment there, which is ongoing, somewhat scaled down, and it stretched over 15 odd years, and we lost 42 soldiers in that period of time. And that's, of course, every one of them's tragic. I'm not trying to diminish the significance of losing 42 soldiers, but you look at and everyone likes to relate it back to the drive your car every day, and the road toll in Australia, we lose 1,500 people a year on the roads, but you don't think twice about hopping in your car and driving around. And I guess that leads back to what you can do to mitigate that risk. And so while combat is inherently a dangerous environment, there's lots of potential to be killed in a combat environment, there's also a lot of stuff you can do to mitigate that risk, and our task group was very, very good at doing that.
In some ways, those random events like standing on an IED or a mine seem much more sinister in the back of your mind, perhaps, did they? Rather than, if you're in a firefight, well, it's game on and you have to have your wits about you. But that low-level stress of just driving around or walking around all the time and seeing that happen to someone else, that must play havoc with your nerves, surely.
I didn't find so. Thinking once again, reflecting in preparation for this talk, I was trying to think of times where I was scared in Afghanistan, and they're few and far between. To be honest, I don't say that to be macho. It's just how it is, and it was never in a gunfight. It was never in a casualty situation. I found those situations to actually be quite calming and to be, which sounds odd, but I would often enter into, if you follow any of Csikszentmihalyi, the Hungarian-American psychologist, talks about that flow state. And I found I'd often go into that flow state, which was very calming, very quiet. And I found my skills were there for me, thankfully, in most of those instances. But the times when I remember feeling a bit anxious and a bit scared were the times when I had no control. And these were things like we'd often get rocketed on our base, and we had a sensor that would pick up incoming rockets a few seconds before they'd hit. And so sometimes when I was lying in bed at night and you'd hear this alarm go off, and you're thinking, you know what, there is nothing I can do here but lie and wait for that rocket to strike. And the chance of getting hit was bugger all. I mean, we did lose people to rocket strikes on our base.
You didn't get under your cot or anything?
No, it was a bit pointless if it hit us. If it hits you, you're a goner. And
the pillow over your head.
Yeah, but I think for anyone confronting a situation like this, it comes down to whether you feel you have any control over the situation. Whether you actually do or not, it's a different beast. But just that feeling of being able to have some influence over the outcome, it really, for me, allowed a lot of that fear to go away. The other times that I've felt a bit sort of concerned was maybe in the back of tactically flying helicopters, on the back gun of armoured vehicles going over some pretty sketchy terrain. Both all these things where I didn't have any control. You're just along for the ride, and if it goes wrong, you're in trouble.
I've really felt that in medicine, working in critical care areas of medicine over the years, the times where you're faced with catastrophic injury or multiple patients, and people say, how do you keep calm in situations like that? And you go, well, it's kind of what we look forward to in this part of our work, and as long as it's all going relatively well and you feel like you at least have a handle on what's happening, the outcomes of the patients are in a way not the thing that determines the way you feel about it, because you're just doing your best and you're hopefully doing a good job. It's those times where I've felt things getting away from me, for example, in a routine anaesthetic when the patient's deteriorating and I can't work out why. And of course you're wondering, is it something I've done? Have I forgotten some basic thing to attend to? And, for example, an undiagnosed anaphylaxis or something. The patient's going down the gurgler and you have no clue what's happening. That's when I get really frightened.
Oh, you're spot on. And something else you raised there, Harry, is a really interesting point, I think. And that is, you mentioned that the outcome of the patient is not directly correlated to how you feel about what's happened. And this was something that I wrestled with psychologically over the years when I took some time to reflect on my time with the military. And there was a number of instances where patients casualties very badly hit, and we dealt a lot with the local nationals, the Afghan local nationals, even the Afghan combatants. Once a enemy combatant was incapacitated, then we treated them. That's what you do under the Geneva Convention. And so there was a number of times where I went through my sequence and the patient died, but I came out of it feeling great because I had responded. I had controlled hemorrhage. I had established an airway. I'd done this. I'd done that, and got to use my skills in a complex environment. And the outcome was a bad one. And then you stuck with this sort of cognitive dissonance, if you like, where you're thinking, "Wow, that was fantastic." You're riding a high. You're on a buzz, but then someone's died, or someone's ended up with their legs off, or a massive spinal injury, or these disastrous consequences. But you're feeling great. And it's hard to describe that to people who don't get it. I can see that you do. But, if you look at that on face value, you think, well, shit, how can that be a positive experience? That's a disaster. That kid died, or that lady ended up with a dense paraplegia, or he's got no legs. And you're like, yeah, but I did this and it worked. And I guess it comes back to what we were talking about before, that opportunity to test your skills in a very challenging environment, and if you're able to go through your sequence and perform well, and your equipment performs well, and you feel that you've risen to the occasion, the actual medical outcome is not directly linked to the emotion of that situation.
Yeah, I agree entirely. I mean, some people seek out this kind of work and some people don't. Some people want to be an emergency medicine physician and work in the resus room, and some people want to do skin checks like my wife and check for melanomas and things. So we've all got this different attitude to the way we work and the risk that entails. But people like the people I'm interviewing, including yourself, clearly go out of their way to put themselves in danger. Now, by that, I need to clarify that, because I don't perceive that the people I talk to think that what they do is particularly dangerous. They, in their mind, and I include myself in this, feel that the risks can be mitigated to the point where the danger is so small that the benefits far outweigh the danger. And as you've said, you can die in the car driving to work tomorrow, and that would be a particularly unsatisfying way for me to go, I have to say. So let's talk a bit about the benefits of risk-taking. I mean, why do you think we do this stuff to ourselves? Because surely there are times in the middle of it where you go, bloody hell, I wish I was at home.
Yeah, it's a great question, and it was never about the risk for me. I was never someone who sought out risk per se, and moving into special operations for me was not about thinking let's get into this, let's go gunfighting here, there, and everywhere. And the reality was, when I first got a glimpse of special operations, when I spoke about that seeing my brother and his mates and meeting everyone and seeing the unit, there wasn't any gunfighting going on. That was the very start of the conflict. And so all of the stuff that I ended up involved in wasn't even happening at that point. So, it wasn't as though I was drawn to that. That wasn't it at all. I saw it as an opportunity to really test myself, and in a way to maybe make up for my failure to reach the level that I wanted to in triathlon. So it was about me and these intrinsic goals to be the best version of myself that I could be, that drew me to that job, and then the risk just came with it. There was never any consideration for me whether I would go out on the ground. When I first got into the special operations world and we went over to Afghanistan, I was pushing to get on every single job. I wanted to be there. And that was, like we were talking about before, because in my mind at that point, I thought I was the bloke to give the best opportunity of salvaging a casualty, which I later learned wasn't the case. But also that, I hadn't experienced the deaths of the blokes. I had one young son at the time. Everything was pretty new, and the selfishly, I wanted to experience all of that, and then over my 4 tours of Afghanistan, that all changed, and my view on risk and the level of risk that I was willing to expose myself to changed. So for my last 2 tours, I was still very keen to get out, and I got out, a bunch of times. But there as many missions as I got out on, I would not go out on because I didn't see that I was going to add any value. So for the jobs where I might have got approached and they said, "Hey Doc, you want to come? You'll be in this Overwatch position." I'm like, "No, I don't want to come." There's no sense me being in an Overwatch position. Doesn't make any sense at all unless if you can project me forward and I can be there near the blokes and provide assistance, then yeah, sure. Or if not, no. Or if they had a medic going forward with an element and it was unjustifiable to send the doctor and just not necessary, then I didn't go. So I started to back off on my risk exposure unless it was justifiable. If there was something that I was potentially going to add value, I was there every time. If there was a helicopter flying around doing a training mission that I didn't need to be on, I wasn't on it. Whereas in the early years, I'm like, yep, let's do it. But then you see enough helicopters smear in, you lose blokes. Was in a helicopter crash myself in 2011, I think that was. Fairly sort of light crash, thankfully. But these sort of things, and on the home front, my wife was managing, the home front, and we were having, as I went along that 5-year period with special operations, we went from 1 kid to 3 kids. And so you start to, the shine started to come off it. With hindsight, there was probably a fair bit of unprocessed trauma that was starting to build up. And so there was a lot of factors that came into it, but certainly my attitude towards risk changed with respect to exposure to unnecessary risk. So there was still very much a drive to put myself in harm's way if I felt it was going to add value, or if I felt I could be the one to mitigate risk. And that's how I saw myself, to mitigate the risk of someone else dying in the field. Because what was unacceptable to me is for me not to go on a job where I thought I might be useful and to have a bloke hit and killed. That's something I couldn't have reconciled in my mind.
It's different for you in that situation compared to me doing something that might have some obvious hazards, but there's no real benefit to anyone except myself, to be honest. I do what I do for some personal fulfillment, and you talked about with your selection process to see what you were capable of and to be the best person you could be. And that's a really important thing for anyone to do because it makes you a better person. And if you're a better person, you're a better father and a better husband, I'm sure. But at least you could kind of justify it to say, well, I'm there for the men and I'm there for their safety in a sense, whereas I can't really do that. So I feel some significant guilt every time I put my mask on and swim underwater into a cave. And that's been, I'm going to be honest, a bone of contention in my relationship with my wife over the years. And there's a thing called aquatic industry divorce syndrome, or AIDS, where has befallen many of my mates.
Yeah.
Did you have some difficult conversations with your wife and even with yourself as time passed and you had more kids?
Yeah, absolutely. And well, when it comes to difficult conversations. My wife is a saint of a woman, as I imagine yours is, and she was. I was on this pathway, in my mind anyway, towards what I had this goal of being a part of special operations before I met my wife. And so I was able to, before we entered into a really serious relationship and before we got married, I was with the Army at the time. And so I could have that conversation with her saying, here's who I am, here's the bloke I want to be, this is going to be a rough ride, are you in or not, because this is make or break, because this is who I am and I'm not going to budge in the short term on that. And there's understanding it in theory and then there's living it in practice, and they're two different things. But God bless her, she accepted that. She accepted that this was what I needed to do to fulfill myself and to not die wondering. That's a real fear of mine. I don't fear failure. I fear not having had a go at something and looking back and thinking, I wonder if I could have done that, And there's a small window when you're physically fit enough before you rack up enough injuries and before the discs in your back start to blow out that you can, and before you get too committed in a family and a career, where you can go and do things like I was fortunately able to do. And she recognised that, hated every bit of it, hated everything. Well, didn't hate, but just had no interest. She's no interest in the military. She accepted that it was my thing, but she didn't engage at all. She when I went away, she lived the single mum life and just kept the family going and was just hugely supportive and accepting that this is what I needed to do. And I had great lines of communication with her, and I'd always said I'd watched my mates get divorced and lose families, and it's very common in the military. It's very, and even more so within special operations, because it's exactly like you're saying with diving. I mean, you get guys and girls that are so hooked on what they're doing, they lose sight of what's happening at home and lose sight of the bigger picture, the longer picture. And there's a lot of other factors, but it's an addictive lifestyle. And it's, saw endless blokes push it, one deployment too many, and come home to an empty house. And I never wanted for that. Of course, I don't think anyone wants for that, but I was very aware that was a possibility if I mismanaged my relationship. And so it was after my fourth tour of Afghanistan, I'd come home and my wife was heavily pregnant with our third son. So she'd been raising the other two, and I was, one year I went away when our middle son was 10 days old, and I came back just before his first birthday. So I had this, I'd come back briefly in between actually, but away for 6 months, and then pretty much had to pack up and go straight away again. I missed 11 months of our middle guy's first year, and then got home just before our third son was born. And it was at that point, just after he was born, that my wife said, "Hey, look, that's enough. It's enough," and I was ready I was ready for that, and so that was the point. It worked out really well, but God bless her, she let me do all of that for that 5-year stretch, and it was a tough time on her while I was off doing that. But now I feel I'm so much of a better person, but not only that, I can look back and say, yeah, I didn't tick every box I wanted to in my military career, but most of them got ticked. So it's a fantastic, and I couldn't go back and do that now. So that window's shut, but I managed to do what I needed to do in that period of my life, and my wife allowed me to do that. And I think if she hadn't of, I would have been respectful for that, but somewhat resentful, to be honest. So thankfully we're not in that position.
So you mentioned that you struggled a little bit when you came home. Did it take a while to work through things?
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel I'm only just coming right now, and I'm 6 years out of the Army. There was a lot of things going on, and I've spent a bunch of time reflecting on this and what was happening when I transitioned out of Army. And there was post-traumatic stress, no question about it, but it was more than that. I don't think that was my fundamental problem. It was, and they're now coining this term transition stress for veterans leaving the Army, leaving the military. And I imagine for anyone who's been in a high-intensity job that they valued and had a sense of purpose in and moves on, be it police, be it medicine, be it anything, you name it, then that transition's a big one. And the biggest part for me was the loss of identity. and the loss of that, being a part of that high performance team, those strong bonds, that what I felt was meaningful work, that stimulating work, that access to the flow state. It was all of that just got stripped away. And so it took me a long time to find my feet and work out who I was as a civilian. My whole identity and all my self-esteem was wrapped up with being the doctor with the military. And then when I moved out of that, it was a massive hit, and it was a big transition, and took years and years to work through. And it wasn't until I stopped all of that fast-paced military lifestyle that I started to have some issues with the trauma along the way coming back to haunt me. It was that environment it was easy to be resilient in that environment. There was always a lot going on, and it was there was never really time to sit around and reflect and ruminate and all that. There was always something to focus on and something new to throw yourself into. And when all that stopped, I think that the brain needed to say, hey, hang on a sec, let's back up a few years and work through this. And so there was all that transition stuff, and the trying to work out who I am as a civilian, and all this other piece, and just trying to make sense of it all has taken a long time. And then moving past that, thinking, well, yeah, that's happened. There's pretty unique experiences. How do you take that and maybe do something good with it? What good can come of all that stuff, and what can I do to best honour the lives of the blokes that didn't come home? How can you try and make a positive out of that? And I guess that's the next phase, is trying to put all that together and do something good with it.
I was very lucky on one occasion to give a talk with Jill Hicks as the other speaker. For those few listeners who don't know, Jill was in London on the day of the bombings, where the train she was on was bombed, and she was so nearly mortally injured that she lost both her legs, and the doctors at the emergency department of the hospital couldn't even identify what gender she was when she got in. So it was a dreadful, dreadful injury. And she has made her life about promoting peace, and she talks a lot about this concept of post-traumatic growth, which I've heard you mention.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess and it's good to be able to have forums to put forward this counterpoint to post-traumatic stress disorder, which is very topical, and it should be. There's lots and lots of people suffering from it. But I think what gets missed in that narrative is most people who suffer significant trauma, military, civilian alike, they actually process that trauma over time and come back to a baseline, their pre-morbid baseline, if you like. And then there's also a significant chunk of people who then move past their baseline and actually become a better person because they've experienced that trauma. So that recalibrates them, if you like. It opens their eyes to being grateful for what they had that they didn't recognize before. And that's certainly what I've experienced, that all those horrible events that I was involved with in Afghanistan has now made me realize, when I come back to Australia, come back to my 3 happy, healthy kids, to my beautiful wife, to my Italian sports car. We live a blessed life, and most of us don't realize it because it's our norm, and that's human nature. You recalibrate to what's around you. But this idea of post-traumatic growth is you take a big hit, it sort of puts you in a hole, and then you come back to normal, and then you think, well, no, normal's not good enough. I'm going to be really grateful for what I've got. I'm going to make the most out of this. I'm going to tell my wife that I love her every single day because my mate can't. I'm going to engage with my parents more than I do because my mates can't. I'm going to be grateful for my kids and really engage there because my mates can't. And that's the whole growth piece. And I think this spirituality also that a lot of people get out of it, that I have also, not so much a religiousness, but just this spirituality and an interest in mindfulness, meditation, and self-optimization. Just, I got to make the most of this because I've been given this gift that the other blokes didn't, and I got to live this life well. And so that's a post-traumatic growth is a fantastic thing. The only downside is you got to have the trauma first to get there.
Dan, I can't think of a better place to leave the podcast with that message for everyone who's listening, that don't take anything for granted, and what we do accept as our normal can be lost in a moment, and we should appreciate every day. So Dan Pronk, thank you so much for joining me.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you, Harry. Cheers.
That's it for this episode of Real Risk. If you're a risk taker or know someone who'd be good for the show, please send me an email on admin@speleopix.com.au. I'd love to hear from you. Let me know what you think of the podcast. Subscribe, give me a rating, but most importantly, join me for the next one. We'll see you again on Real Risk.